4:02 according to the computer on October 17th. We are in the City Commission chamber. This is the Independent Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee. I will note that we have a quorum. Ms. Phillips is not here. She is excused. The first item on our agenda, I'll talk into the mic since somebody's giving me a dirty look. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments, corrections, or edits to the minutes? Seeing none, Mr. Davis moves the minutes and Mr. Smith seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda, the three-piece item, is the Ethics Officer Report. So, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, if you want to go over the summary of your activities in the last month, please, ma'am.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. You'll see, as per usual, the activities carried out by me since the last meeting. Notable among that is I did meet informally with the state attorney since the last meeting, and that was because I'd never really met him before. So I may actually get him as a guest speaker at some point next year to come talk to the board. And he had nothing but great things to say about Mr. Davis. Yeah. Just thought I would get that plug in. And later on in the agenda, you'll see some of the work product that I did in terms of additional investigations. We also are doing our planning for 2018. So there's some discussion that we'll have about meeting dates and times, and also formulating recommendations for 2018. I also did give a presentation and attend the Southeastern Conference for Public Administration. That was in Fort Lauderdale, and it was brought to my attention that I could actually go back to school and achieve a master's or a PhD in public administration at the Askew School, but I'm thinking long and hard about that. I would bring to your attention that the City Commission workshop that is going to be discussing our recommendations to the Commission, that is taking place on Wednesday. That's this coming up Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and it's going to be here in the chamber. And the chair will be attending and presenting our recommendations to the Commission. And if you wish to attend, obviously you are welcome. It's a public meeting and most likely will be broadcast as well, followed by at 4 o'clock the normal meeting of the City Commission. So I believe that concludes my report.
One comment I'd like to make, in terms of the investigation that Ms. Meadows-Keefe did, I specifically asked her to make it limited, and at some point we'll discuss that for a bylaws change. Since we've already determined that we don't have jurisdiction within the city ethics ordinance to adjudicate this particular matter, it seemed to me that we didn't have a wise reason to conduct a full bore investigation and incur the costs associated with that investigation just to determine whether or not to refer the matter. So I thought the concept of a limited investigation where we would basically use Ms. Meadows-Keefe and Mr. Currington's skills and expertise rather than going out and spending a lot of money and hiring outside folks to do an investigation simply to support a referral. Okay, the next item in your report, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
The next item is the spreadsheet prepared to indicate the calls or inquiries received in the last month, and those are noted. We do have one case number 2017 0114 That's the Tallahassee citizen call on 9/20/2017 regarding sale of city property to College of Medicine. I have recommended a closure of that item since it does not, in my view, violate the city ethics code. So there is that one.
Ms. Meadows-Keefe, let's do these one at a time. Can
Yep.
you, in terms of the complainant questioning the sale, was there question related to the fact that the decision wasn't made in public? Because that seems to be what, in terms of action taken, that seems to be the basis of your response.
Correct. And the item was discussed in a regularly noticed city commission meeting. The details concerning said sale were contained in the agenda materials, and there was opportunity for public comment.
Okay. Does any member of the board have any reason to want to pursue that as a board, or do we want to accept staff's recommendation to close it?
Accept the recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Grant moves that we accept the recommendation, and Ms. McNeil seconds. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Okay, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, number 115.
Okay, number 115, I don't have a recommendation on at this point because of the date on which it was received, which is, I think, the date that I was sending the agenda materials out. And you'll see that it involves a newspaper publisher who made a request to some city commissioners for discounts or free waiver of fees, public records. And that request was not granted by the commission, and the records were subsequently released after payment was received. So I did have a gentleman do a written complaint to myethics@talgov.com email address. I did do some preliminary discussions with the chair. I also reviewed the city ethics code for the definition of lobbying and expect to have a recommendation next month. This also brings up a point that we'll probably talk about later, that the subject of the complaint basically waived his or her right to confidentiality. Normally, we don't talk about who it is or what the specifics are at this stage. However, the subject did waive confidentiality actually by writing in the newspaper about it. So,
But for the benefit of the board members, unless anyone has an objection, we'll come back at this next month with more information. But the issue is, in a broad sense to me, if a business or someone who is employed by an entity, if that entity requests public records, which they have a right to do, and then requests a full or partial waiver of the cost for producing those public records, is making that request, does that make that person a lobbyist? Because it is in the city ethics ordinance, the thing that we would regulate is the registration of lobbyists. So we're going to have to look at this issue. I think Ms. Meadows-Keefe is going to have to look at it fairly broadly, because I suspect that every young adult who gets pulled over by a police officer asks if there's any way they can get a warning instead of a written ticket. Obviously, they're not representing a business, but people ask for waivers all the time. Whether that makes them lobbyists, I don't know. And if you're a truck driver for a business and you get pulled over by a police officer and ask if you can get a warning instead of a ticket, knowing that your employer would be responsible for the ticket, does that make you a lobbyist? I think we're going to have to look at the range of kinds of behavior that would be captured here, as well as the statutory and case law definition of lobbyists. So it is not, I think for Ms. Meadows-Keefe, it's going to be a non-trivial issue.
I'm going to request from the chair and with the board's assent that I will probably engage Mr. Currington in some discussion to concur with me, so that obviously I'm presenting a correct recommendation. And I expect I do want to talk to him for an hour or two about it.
Okay. Does any board member have an objection to that? Mr. Grant?
As a question, just from my reading of this, it appears that you had someone who is in the private sector asking the public sector essentially for records, public records, and then looking to get them for free. And then the public sector folks, the city, said no. That seems to me the end of the story. What am I missing? Because even if there is some sort of unregistered lobbying that they were doing, by doing that, do we have any jurisdiction over the Tallahassee Democrat?
Well, I think that's the nature of the issue is what is lobbying? If say a lobbyist before the legislature, if they go in with an issue that's a non-starter and they work all the members and they're completely unsuccessful, can't even get a bill or an amendment filed, they're still lobbying and they're still required to register because they are being paid to attempt to influence the outcome of a public decision or a decision made by public officials. So somewhere in there is a well-stated question that I can't dredge out of my feeble memory, but you may well be right, and that may be what we hear next month, but we're going to cut staff loose on that to figure it out, because it has implications, I think, broader than this particular, and we've talked in the past about one of our recommendations last year to the city, or earlier this year, I guess, to the city was we thought they could probably improve their definitions of what it means to be a lobbyist, to make it clear that there are many people who come to the city who are not lobbying when they're not paid, if they're there for their church or their community association or neighborhood association, trying to get things to make the neighborhood better, and they're not being paid to do that, that's not lobbying. We thought the city could make clear so that more people would feel able to talk to their officials and not be compelled to feel like they might be lobbying. And this kind of cuts the other way, and we want to find the sweet spot so that we're, people who are being paid to influence public ought to be lobbyists, and people who aren't ought not to be. I'm talking a lot. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're on page 3.
And this is our year-end budget report, and this represents our 2017 budget and how we did last year, and we did come in much under budget, which is good. We didn't have to utilize all of the resources that we were approved to use. Looks like we came in about half of that, so that was a good year. But again, I would remind the board members that what we spend in the way of things like legal fees, investigators, and court reporters will in large part depend upon complaint volume. So if we continue to get few complaints, that number will stay low. If complaints increase, the number may increase in an accompanying manner. I'd also bring up that we are re-upping or restarting the campaign contribution refund program. I would note for sure that it was not a significant fiscal impact on the city in the first cycle where we ran it, but the form's been provided to candidates, and they may start using it. So that's kind of another unknown that I want y'all to keep in mind.
So just on that one item, if the campaign refunds were fully utilized, that would eat up a third or a fourth of our surplus for this year. That one item would.
It could.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments or questions, Ms. Meadows-Keefe?
I have a quick question.
Mr. Grant.
Just to re-educate me on the investigative process. You just give me a thumbnail sketch of that. Essentially what we're saying is we have a complaint, then we have funding that we could, in fact, hire investigators if needed. Okay?
Yes, sir.
And then, but that's a decision for the board to make. Is that correct? Is that where we are?
We would really have two decisions. The first would be whether we felt it was a matter that needed an investigation to be conducted. And then the other that I think would be really a board decision with some staff advice is what kind of investigator. whether we ought to hire somebody with law enforcement background, with auditing background, so that there isn't one person out there as an investigator that we would automatically go to, and then we'd have to conduct some type of procurement depending upon the nature of the complaint. If it was something that needed to be addressed immediately, I suspect we might be able to sole source. If it's something that had occurred and we had time to deal with it, in our typical get-together once a month fashion, we would probably do some type of competitive procurement.
So case by case?
Yes, yes, very much, because we don't know what's coming down the pike. Okay, that concludes Ms. Meadows-Keefe's Ethics Officer report. Next is our ethics moment. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just an update on this ticket saga in Atlanta, that there's apparently, I have not been there yet, but it looks like the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia is great. And there was some economic participation by the city of Atlanta and their development authority, Invest Atlanta, to subsidize or pay for that stadium. And kind of the question was the city of Atlanta Board of Ethics willing to revisit a formal opinion that it issued in 2013 when presented kind of with the same identical question. They said that you can't just give out tickets to athletic events at this stadium unless you're performing an official duty. So maybe you're saying the Pledge of Allegiance, maybe you're saying something on behalf of the city of Atlanta, but it would need to be an affirmative duty in advancement of your job, not just sitting in an expensive seat. So they said that they felt that in 2013 this was not appropriate, and that a contract term that included in it that tickets might be given to city staff or city officials wasn't okay, because it violated the code. Well, they got re-asked the question this last time, and they basically reaffirmed their 2013 decision, and they declined to expand the definition of official duties to business meetings. So I think the theory was that if you could bring a business person who might want to do business in Atlanta to a game and convince them to open up, say, an Amazon headquarters in Atlanta, that could inure to the benefit of the city. And that should be considered an official capacity type of transaction. The ethics board did not buy that and said, no, we're going to basically stick with what we said in 2013. So they asked, and it was answered in the negative.
Okay. Any questions? Sounds like a wise decision. Editorial comment. Next on our agenda would be public comment on any of the agenda items. I don't have any cards. Anybody? Oh.
Currington.
Well, either Jerry or I fell down on the job here. Got preference in terms of who goes first? Mr. Jackson, yours is on top. You want to go first?
Herman Jackson, 1341 Jackson Bluff. First of all, I want to go on the record as saying this is a unbelievably wonderful day today, and I hope everyone is outside enjoying it. Second thing I want to suggest is, and thank our ethics officer. She contacted me a week or so ago and said, as people call me, would I be able to share that information and names to her? And I asked one question. I said, if I give somebody a name, what protection do they have that they won't be fired by Rick Fernandez within a week. And the response is, we don't have a whistleblower protection clause in the ethics ordinance. Well, that's why I never share names with anyone. That's why I spent this past week with 5 different city employees, 4 of them current employees, 4 of them concerned about being fired, if in fact they're even seen with me. So to tell you where we have to go and kind of hide out, we have employees that are fearful, and it is kind of funny, but it's unbelievable. We have employees that are that afraid of just telling the truth. And when I share with you in the next week to 10 days what's going on, you'll definitely not think it's very funny. So number 1, let's include, when we're asking to change things, let's include a whistleblower protection. Write it however you need to do it. You're the attorneys, but these employees need that. We have a half a dozen, if not a dozen, past employees woke up one day and found out their job was gone, and they're in the process of suing the city. If it hadn't been filed, it will be. There's a problem here. Second thing, I know that Gil's Commissioner Ziffer, he wants to say, oh, you have to sign your name. You have to sign your name. No, we have to refuse that. We have to allow people to contact you folks. I don't ask people to sign their name. You shouldn't ask them to sign their name. In a court of law, you have the right to face your accuser. But not if I have information that I can share with Julie, then she can go out and do the investigation. We shouldn't have to ask city employees to become public when we have a lawsuit going on because they're afraid of being fired. That's just common sense. But that's not what Ziffer is going to be asking for, so we got to stop that. Third thing, let's ask, when I asked, because when Julie asked me that, I knew the answer was no, but then I had to explain why. You need to ask to be able to subpoena records. This body needs to be able to subpoena records. If you can't force people to talk, and that's the reason I found my ethics complaints and my other complaints, okay? They will get commissioners under oath and they talk, and almost every time I've done it, they've made a mess of it, okay? They actually answer questions. So that's why I keep, as long as it's a positive thing, I keep doing it. Getting that subpoena. The fourth thing, I looked at your fines. Okay, if someone fills out paperwork, doesn't file this, doesn't file that, $1,000 is a fine penalty. But when you talk about misuse of public position, to me, that's like bribery. If you're going to pay me cash, if I'm selling my vote, $1,000? That's a damn joke. A few years ago, you had our mayor, John Marks, that was getting paid $150,000 a year from Honeywell. Now, they funneled it through Honeywell's attorneys. Do you think he would be concerned about a $1,000 fine? So whoever came up with it, and I assume that came up from the city attorney's position, I would suggest if it's paperwork, it's $1,000. At a very minimum, misuse of public position. How much is a good fine for selling your vote? That's what we're talking about. $5,000? First offense? I don't think so. Selling a vote has to be more punishment than $5,000. How about $10,000? That'd be reasonable. Second offense? Maybe $25,000. You know, I'd say second time you get caught selling your vote, you're removed from the city commission. Now, I don't know all the legality in that, but a $1,000 fine is embarrassing.
Ms. Jackson, let me interrupt you for 1 second. What would you think about something where the fine is not capped at a specific dollar amount, but it is somehow related to the value of the offense?
That'd be fine too. I like that.
Okay.
I like that, because that would probably be significantly more. And then, so however you work that out. And then I saw something, I noticed our representative who's resigned, who was appointed by the city. And as soon as I read that one morning, I said, well, this is great timing. When you go to the city, if I got arrested for bank robbery, the judge is not going to say, Irwin, go ahead and pick out one of your closest friends, and we're going to put them on the jury, just to give you a leg up. We should not have the city commission, who may be looking at misuse of public position, and they have the right to put their friend, their close confidant. The answer would be no. Now, how would you do that? I think this board needs to have more outreach. I think this board needs to show, to gain the confidence of city employees. You don't have that confidence now. One way to do that, and I got 4 or 5, one way is to modify the ordinance and say, instead of having the city appoint someone, we'll have the, whatever we got, 5, 6 people, 7 people, but one of the commissioners should be elected by the citizens of Tallahassee. Let's have one ethics person elected by the citizens. You clearly have control over everything else. It wouldn't hurt one person that the citizens, then if they trust that person, you're going to see the number of complaints go extremely high. There's something wrong, and the documentation is pretty clear. The reason that I'm running around town hiding, inviting people out to my personal house to have conversations about corruption in the city is that they're not coming in here. I've said this before. It's nothing personal with Julie. The problem is perception. And in people's perception, in their mind, it's reality. They're not coming to City Hall. They're not going to give you their name. They're not going to, you have to go out there. You have to prove to them that you're on their side. Now, no one ever asked me, am I going to tell the mayor their name? No one asked me if I'm on their side or the commissioner's side. That's fairly well established. You don't have to follow my approach, but you need to have that kind of confidence. So if you'll consider those things, I think that would make this significantly better, in my humble opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I will kind of piggyback on that, remind the members around the end of the last calendar year and beginning of this calendar year, we did a self-evaluation. We'll be beginning that again here in the next couple of months, so that sometime in the spring, I suppose, we will come up with another, if we have them, set of recommendations, either for us to improve the way we operate or to the city to change policies or ordinances. I see that, in my view, as kind of an annual process, because I think it's a chance to talk about exactly the list of things that Dr. Irwin just listed off. You can throw things at me if I forget the doctor. I mean, I duck real good. So just to remind everybody, start keeping a list of things that you want to raise as things we need to improve, and we'll go through them. Next is Mr. Wilcox. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I was going to thank Ms. Phillips for her service, but I'll wait and do that when she's here next time. Just a few kind of random thoughts. Mr. Jackson brought up the proposal by Commissioner Ziffer to prohibit the board from hearing anonymous complaints. It seems to me, and I'm not a lawyer, so maybe Mr. Currington would want to take a look at this, but it seems to me that that infringes on the charter, established independence of this board. If you've adopted, bylaws that say you will accept anonymous complaints. I question whether, the city commission can infringe on your independence to do that. Another thought, as far as the lobbying that you were talking about earlier, I'm not going to weigh in on whether the publisher of the Democrat is a lobbyist or not, but I did have a call from a reporter who was questioning the relationship of someone who was hired as a consultant and there had a close relationship with a member of the city commission. And it seemed to me that this board, and with your oversight authority over the lobbying registration process, might consider doing an audit to see if people are actually complying with those lobby registration requirements. We all know that there's a kind of a blurry line between consulting and lobbying, but if somebody is being paid to establish a relationship or use a relationship with a commissioner, it seems like they should be registering as a lobbyist. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit with you about Verlindia, the chair of the Florida Commission on Ethics, her letter to the board regarding your ability to refer complaints to the Florida Commission on Ethics. It seems like, to me, what she's saying is that you don't really have the authority to refer complaints, as a board to the Commission on Ethics. An individual member of the board could swear out a complaint and follow the normal process and make a complaint to the Florida Commission on Ethics. And I guess that's an option that you should keep before you, but I do share some concerns about a board member referring an anonymous complaint to the Florida Commission on Ethics, and I think that should be a factor, as Ms. Doss suggests, in your considerations of whether you would do that. And she does also make the point that there are the four sources of referral that can refer anonymous complaints, and I think that should be an option that the board would keep before it, to perhaps send the complaint to the state attorney would seem like the most logical. And even if it's an anonymous complaint, and as long as it's laid out in some kind of a newspaper report that is out there for the public to see, maybe the state attorney would consider referring that complaint on to the Florida Commission on Ethics. Short of the city commission giving you a tougher ethics code to enforce, it seems like those are your only options at this point. So.
Thank you, and we will discuss Ms. Doss's response a little later. I do want to comment, since Julie already pointed out that I'll probably be talking to the City Commission at least briefly next week in their workshop. This whole idea of sworn complaints, I am not at all sure that the City Commission can say that we can't do anything as a board without a sworn complaint. I think they can say, they can put in the ethics ordinance that we can only punish or consecrate particular behaviors on the basis of a sworn complaint. But since we've taken the position that we have the ability to self-initiate complaints, I know I was one of the proponents of us taking unsworn or anonymous complaints in the beginning. I would think that we could still take a position that we can, anything anonymous that comes in, whether it's to the hotline or comes in as a complaint, can come before this board. Ms. Meadows Keefe can characterize it that way. If we think it needs to be closed, we'll close it. If we think it needs to be opened, then we can self-initiate a complaint on that matter. If we think it's serious enough, if it's in the nature of a whistleblower matter where someone is compelled not to associate their name with it, I think as a board we've got the capacity, and I'll ask Mr. Currington if he'll think about this a little bit, but it seems to me we don't have to give up everything just because of the way that the City Commission writes the ordinance defining those particular behaviors that we have the jurisdiction to consecrate. So I think there's a middle ground there for us where we can still allow people to get their issue before us without their name associated with it, and give us the chance to determine how serious the issue is. Next is on the agenda, it's titled Correspondence from a Board Member. I think probably everybody has seen it now. Ms. Phillips has resigned effective December 30th of this year, so I'm assuming the city, given the lead time they have, will appoint a sixth member for us, unless and until, as Dr. Jackson points out, somebody's able to successfully amend the city charter, which is what you have to do to have some other appointing authority. She will be back, as far as I know, for the final meetings this year. Her conflict this month had nothing to do with her resignation there, just other than timing coincidence. But we will have a chance to say goodbye and good wishes to her at the next meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
the city has already, I believe, begun the process for taking applications for the vacancy so that we can have the vacancy filled, again, by the commission, unless it's changed, by January. So hopefully we don't have lag time. I know we've already, or the city's already received one application. So I'm saying this on television for the 50 people that may watch, that if you're interested in putting in an application, the city does have an open application process. So if people are interested in potentially being selected, there's an application out there for them to access.
Okay. And now I'm going to lobby the private sector. Maybe the newspaper will help us a little bit with just a little announcement on that one somewhere. Anybody who's going to read the article might read that, a line in the article saying, you know, if you want to join up, please come on. Obviously, you can wear your blue jeans and come to the meeting. When they change that, if they change that rule, I have to resign. Next item on the agenda is the revision to the bylaws. These are all in Article 9 of our bylaws related to complaint procedures, and I'm going to let Ms. Meadows-Keefe or Mr. Currington, as appropriate, go through these for us.
I'm going to try to do this quickly.
And Mr. Currington, you'll interrupt freely. You're recognized to add or subtract as appropriate.
So I'll say first that this is the second time around for this, for all of these provisions that are now in pretty much a brand new Article 9. This is, however, the first time you're seeing Article 9 as it will look, assuming you approve the changes that are there. So notable among those, again, you've considered these in the past. We have set kind of a statute of limitations concerning stuff that happened before the inception of the board. We've also said in paragraph 5 that things need to be brought within 5 years. Unless there's some kind of fraud, concealment, or misrepresentation that prevents someone from being able to discover it. And in that case, we're giving people 7 years. We're codifying in the bylaw that if I receive written materials related to a complaint, that I'm sending those via mail, U.S. mail, to the board members so that they have a chance to look at them before the meeting occurs. We added some language.
You'll tell us what the item number you're on as you go through these. You're about to move to 7.
Correct.
7G.
I'm now on page 2 of 6 on new item number 7. This just talks about where we refer various matters, specifically in C. We had initially said we're referring issues of retaliation and discrimination to Office of Workforce Development. We did add the Florida Commission on Human Relations or the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Elections matters in G. We're adding Department of State Division of Elections. And Then we're memorializing in I the requirement that when issues are resolved through sending to anyone referenced in A through H, the board will receive a report upon the conclusion of that matter. A lot of it subsequent is what I would consider cleanup language. The chair and board counsel and I met on some of these just to make sure that everything read as well as it could. Let's see. And before, now I'm on page 3 of 6, and I'm on the top of page 3, and it's number 9. It's the red line up there at the top, lines 4 through 7. If an investigation reveals legal sufficiency, the board may sign a sworn complaint through the chair or any board member in their capacity as an individual with the Florida Commission on Ethics. So before, I think the bylaw we had drafted had kind of a convoluted process for how that would work, and we just condensed it down that any board member in their individual capacity may file a complaint with the Florida Commission on Ethics. Obviously, you have that right, even if you're not a member of the Independent Ethics Board here in the city of Tallahassee. But this comports with Verlindia Doss's letter that says an individual can file the complaint.
And let me interrupt and ask Mr. Currington a question. In terms of the board voting for the chair or any member to file a complaint with the Commission on Ethics, you have given us an opinion, I believe, that about because there are attorney fees provisions in the statute if you file a sworn complaint that's malicious, basically, that doing that upon the vote of the board would provide some protection to the person who filed the complaint. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. Excuse the interruption, Ms.
No problem at all. We have also, in response, still on page 3, section, new paragraph 10, line numbers 8 through 18, addressing due process concerns that have been brought up from subjects of complaints. We are including now a notice requirement that if there's a vote related to referral to an agency, that the ethics officer will report that to the subject, and then the subject has a right to have the matter reheard. So that was added. Now going down to paragraph B2, starting on line 36. When there's a complaint alleging a violation of the city ethics code in an identifiable subject, the complaint shall be forwarded by me, by the independent ethics officer, to the subject. And then I would say that the rest of the bylaw revisions are pretty much self-explanatory and just cleaning up language, unless Mr. Currington or the chair want to differ with that evaluation.
Does anyone have any questions, edits, corrections, comments? Since these have all been before us before, we would today be approving them. Okay, seeing none, I think Mr. Grant is moving approval of the bylaw changes, and Ms. McNeil is seconding. I'm getting the nod there. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And these are approved. I have 2 commas.
Okay.
That Oxford comma thing I've got going on, me and Sonny. That's revision of the bylaws. Item 8 is the schedule for 2018. You can all put it in your phones. It looks like we are on a regular schedule so far as we know for next year. There may be an interruption like there was this year, but we don't know about it at the moment. I continue to say that whoever is chair, I think at some point may be able to consider making the meetings a little shorter. I would love to see us get to where we don't have complaints to consider, get to a 5 to 7 time slot. I think it would be good for everyone if we started a little later in the day. I would hope that we could accommodate that at some point in the future, although I've said that before and I haven't done it. So, for what that's worth.
Do we want to do that
We're gonna postpone the break for a little bit and just keep rolling here. We have recommendations. Well, first, we have this one-page report. It has the recommendation and the city response, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe's going to walk us through. While we've gotten a fair bit of attention on the formal recommendations that we've made to the city concerning the ethics ordinance, we have made both formally and informally a number of recommendations to the city concerning policy changes and other changes that we thought fit squarely within the concept of ethics, and most of them have been pretty well pursued, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe's going to walk us through those just so everybody can give themselves a pat on the back.
Okay, we have this side-by-side chart, and some of these, again, are dependent on the will of the city commission, but we have been able to effectuate many of the policy, if not all the policy recommendations that this board made, and I'd like to thank Human Resources and Management for working diligently to implement these recommendations. So, and I've included with your materials, this was put on today because I just got them, but we had talked about in our recommendations the tracking of outside employment so that there's some awareness about where folks are working outside of their city jobs. And I have provided for you the city's tracking that through the PeopleSoft software system, and there's kind of a skeletal outline there of how they're tracking that and the form that employees are going to fill out, and this will be part of their official employment record, and they're going to be responsible for keeping up with that to the extent that that changes. Next, we've also got in policy this policy about outside employment. Again, you'll see revised October 16th, 2017. So there's that reporting requirement upon accepting outside employment. And then there's also a piece in there about the value of goods that city employees can take. Now, this one might be interesting. Before, there was a requirement that city employees not be able to take anything worth more than $50, right, as a gift. It was pointed out to me in various ethics education sessions. Employees saw that commissioners and people that file the Form 1s, they can take up to $100, and that was pointed out to me that there's a apparent conflict there between what an employee can take versus what a commissioner can take. And so absent asking the commission to be willing to just take $50, we decided that the employee should be able to take up to $100 so that it's consistent. Now, later on, if we want to revisit that, but I felt for consistency and to respond to those complaints or those issues that came to me, they detected that difference and we've responded to that. And I don't think this is reflected here on this side-by-side chart, but we did have a presentation about people that are serving on committees to select vendors. So those evaluation committees that employees regularly complete a conflict of interest form where they certify they have no conflict as they're evaluating the potential bidders. I did check to make sure that form was actually being utilized and not just sitting on a drive somewhere on someone's computer. And I actually did get copies back that process is being used and those forms are being utilized. And Ms. Phillips really did help a lot with making sure that got done. So we also have clarified on our treasurer clerk website that, individuals asking for stuff for themselves and that aren't getting paid don't have to register as lobbyists. And now we have this other question that's interesting. But we have tried to clarify, and the treasurer clerk has clarified that people generally asking for things without being paid and for themselves don't have to register as lobbyists. And in terms of ethics education, the city's been good about that too. And again, that was another thing really important to Board Member Phillips, and the city's cooperated with changing all that language from training to education.
Okay. This really isn't on the agenda, but I know Mr. Currington, you don't know this is coming, so feel free to take a breath or tell me it's time to take a break. I believe you've had a couple conversations with the city attorney in terms of what they might do with our ordinance jurisdiction.
The misuse of office?
Yes, yes. Is there anything that you would like to say to enlighten us, or do we need to wait and see?
I don't mind sharing that the city attorney's office, I think, was fairly open to the suggestion of a misuse of public position ordinance addition. There was some discussion. He obviously wasn't committing for the city commission, but he seemed to be optimistic that they were open-minded. From a legal perspective, he did not have a problem. We did discuss the concept of de minimis misuse. There's some shared concern that we avoid Latin terms. And so the suggestion was that in the very definition of what is a special benefit or privilege, that say valued at no more than $25. Again, he seemed receptive to that. But my impression was that we'll have a friendly audience and that the city will adopt something, but there were no guarantees until they have the workshop, until they have a vote.
Okay.
There's one about gifts too. Mr. Currington, we also did have draft language on proposed amendment to the Tallahassee City Ethics Code related to gifts, and then another one on disclosures. Those are with the agenda materials.
Let me address the disclosures first.
Okay, perfect.
Again, no legal concerns with that. The city attorney could not foresee or predict the vote of the board, but depending on the outcome of the workshop in the city commission meeting. But it sounded like, certainly from a legal perspective, they saw no hindrance to adopting a concurrent filing. Actually, on the gifts, I did not speak to the city attorney, and I think I was under the impression that you had, but.
Okay. I got something to say on that.
Well, okay, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized.
Okay. I had not heard anything really pro or con from the city attorney. I know he's out of town today. But a concern was raised that I heard about that I wanted the board to be aware of, that the way this is phrased right now, I think there's some concern that city commissioners, if they were to ask for people to donate to breast cancer research, the March of Dimes, various charitable or nonprofit causes, they could get caught in this. situation where they're not soliciting money for themselves or for their campaign, but instead they're advancing an issue that's important to them. So I think there's also a concern with it, the acceptance of the gift too. If they actually get a donation that they then provide to the charity or nonprofit. So the suggestion I had is that we somehow attach or include within this language something that this does not include asking for donations to nonprofits or charities, and we could word it however y'all were comfortable. But we wanted there to be, or there was a request that there be a carve out for those kinds of activities, because many of our folks are involved in raising money for not-for-profits or charities.
Okay, I know under the state law, when a public official can accept checks or cash or whatever, donations for an organization that they represent, and I believe the commission opinions basically say that they need to fairly expeditiously turn. If they hold the checks over a weekend, that's fine, but they shouldn't deposit them in an interest-bearing account and hold it for 3 months. And somewhere in between there is a line you cross. So I think that concept is well established under the state gift law, and I would certainly think that the same thing ought to apply here.
Okay.
So next month we will go over all the good stuff that happens next week at the City Commission workshop. Next is the letter that we got from Ms. Doss, who's the Executive Director of the Florida Ethics Commission on Ethics, I should say. I would say that I don't think there's anything in here that was a surprise, but we had all been saying we think the State Ethics Commission will do blah, blah, blah. We think that the way they read the law is it requires this. So instead of saying we think and limiting our behavior, I went ahead and simply asked about what we can do. And clearly they said we can refer anonymous complaints to the 4 statutory entities, which could conceivably re-refer to the State Commission. We can file a sworn, the chair or any member of this board could file a sworn complaint at the direction of the board. So I don't think there's anything in here that was particularly new or a surprise to us, but at least now we know these are the rules rather than guessing that they are the rules. So any questions? Okay. This is where, what time is it? 5:08. Let's keep rolling. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, we asked you to do a limited investigation at the last meeting. We've been on this complaint involving the city manager. About 3 months ago, I think, we decided that it was not within our jurisdiction within the ethics ordinance. And then subsequently we decided that we wanted to refer, but we did not make that decision in a public meeting or using any of the due process procedures that we just adopted in our bylaws. And so we came back and we addressed all of that in public meetings. And at the last meeting, we were trying to decide whether to go ahead and reaffirm that decision to refer to the State Ethics Commission or drop the matter or do something else. And the consensus of the body was that we simply wanted more information. So you and Mr. Currington have conducted a limited investigation, which is outlined for us in about 3 pages of results with numerous attachments, including some exhibits and the results of some interviews that Mr. Currington conducted. I hope everybody's had a chance to look at those. If anybody wants, we can get Ms. Meadows-Keefe to go through them. Otherwise, I would just ask if anyone has any questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe on any item that is in the results of the investigation. I'd also thank FSU, who provided us with some high-level academic advice on catering and discounts in catering, and it sounds, based on the response that we got from the head of the department there, like it's pretty much like buying an airline ticket. The price depends on the day and what terminal you make the connection from, and a whole variety of other things. And two people in adjacent seats, probably there's almost no chance they paid the same amount for their tickets. So catering, we are advised, is that fluid in terms of its pricing. So this being the fourth month
I believe so.
that we've had this, I think it is time probably for us to fish or cut bait. So,
It was June when we first
Okay.
got a complaint.
okay. So I would be happy to accept any motion that would close or that would move this on, close it out, whatever. Mr. Grant.
I have a question. And the way I understand part of our charter and our task is to be a conscience and in some ways a watchdog for the city in terms of ethical, unethical behavior. And so in looking at this, based on what Julie has come up with and my reading of it, certainly it appears that there was no overt action to try to get a discount in this particular case. And so, the way I read it is, that's the first way I read it. The second is that when you're in a leadership position, and this is something that I do understand, especially in the public sector, you have responsibility above and beyond anybody else who's not in the public sector to ensure that your actions are above reproach and that there is no perception of impropriety. When you are in a public position and you are in a negotiation like this, or something like this happens where you are contracting or somebody in your family is contracting with a vendor, in my humble opinion, it behooves the person who is doing that, who is the public official, to say, look, I want to make sure that I get the same kind of deal that everybody else gets, and there are no discounts, because God forbid somebody finds out about this and I'm in front of the ethics board or something like that. I mean, that's kind of where that's what I think, and that goes along with leadership. Goes along with perception of impropriety, and those kinds of things. When you hear about that in the news all the time. Everything from people like the Vice President of the United States says, you know what, I don't like to be seen in public having lunch with a woman who's not my wife. Why? Because of the perception of impropriety. So a lot of times, as you know, the perception of impropriety is as bad as impropriety itself. So in the ranking order of things, do I think this is some place where he really did something very wrong? Probably not. Okay. Is there a perception of impropriety? Absolutely so. And so I think that the board, the commission, needs to take a look at that in with the ranking of those types of things, offenses, from, go to jail to, slap on the wrist kind of things. But I think that it's important for the commission to be that conscious, to say, look, if you're a public official, you need to be aware of perceptions of impropriety. And so accepting a discount from somebody who does business with the city and you're connected with in other ways is not a good move. Okay, is not appropriate, all right, and is not in the best interest. Well, I should say it's not the kind of behavior that you expect from someone in the public sector who's in a leadership position. So that's kind of where I come down on that. And so but I would listen to the wisdom of the other members of the board and see what they think about it, because I think what you're looking for is a motion as to what we do with this. Certainly, I don't think my opinion doesn't fall in the category of some sort of punishment or fine or anything like that, but maybe it's something that the board then, I say make a decision, but writes a letter or makes a statement that says these are the kinds of things that are not appropriate for people in leadership positions in the public sector. because the perception of impropriety is a lot of times as bad as the impropriety itself. Now I'm repeating myself, so I apologize. Anyway, I'm trying to get my point across, but I would like to listen to what other board members have to think about it before we have a motion. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. It is. Anybody else? Comments? Sage advice? Mr. Davis.
I think we've talked about this before, about whether it would be appropriate as an ethics board when we're in a situation where there's no ethics code provision within the city ethics code that would allow us to move forward, but we would still have the ability to offer some influence for the public good by way of comments or letters. And so I appreciate what Mr. Grant has said, and I wonder if it would be appropriate in occasions like this to write a letter to the city manager and the city commission saying, we don't have a basis for moving forward under the facts and the current code in this type of situation, but we do think that it raises the question of the appearance of impropriety and could discourage the public with their confidence in government. And we would ask that these situations be avoided at all costs. Would that not be appropriate to attempt to bear that influence?
Okay. Ms. McNeil or Mr. Smith, anything to add? Mr. Smith.
I'm along the same line of thinking. I would like to express some sort of message or send some message from the board in some way. It didn't look good to me, and I don't think it looked well to others. So I would like to try to express something, even though we don't have the jurisdiction to really do anything seriously about it.
Okay. Ms. McNeil's nodding her head. You're
I
recognized.
mean, I don't think we have any other choice but to say something to the commission.
Okay.
I have one more comment, Mr.
Please,
Chair.
Mr. Grant.
I would just finally say that I think, I know people think in terms of judicial actions and punishments and that sort of thing. I think sometimes just a statement from a board like this that says, hey, this is not appropriate behavior, or there's perception of impropriety, whether intended or not, that is something that should not be modeled by anybody else. Then I think you get the message to the individual, but also to others. And I think that's part of our charter, I would think, is to try to encourage ethical behavior among those in public office, which goes to back to those leadership things I said. All right, I'm sorry, I said enough there. But anyway, you understand my point.
Mr. Currington.
I feel compelled, I hope I don't step over the line here, but Julie and I had a very limited investigation, and we did not make any findings of violation or no violation of the gift law. And I think, therefore, this board should avoid insinuating whether there was a violation or no violation, either way. And if it's going to make a motion, it would be to the extent of what appearances are.
Okay. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
This is for the board's information only, that one of the things I've been doing is preparing ethics education for the commission. For next year, I do it every year, and this year they're going to get 4 hours. And one of the topics that I've got a speaker coming to talk about is appearance of impropriety. So that'll be a presentation that they get, in addition to whatever other action this board takes.
Okay, well, let me see if I can. I've been taking notes here, and it seems to me that there are 5 things that we could do, and they are not mutually exclusive, so there are permutations. One is we could refer to the state attorney, which is one of those entities that would accept an anonymous complaint, and they could decide what to do with it. Second is the board could direct me to make file a sworn complaint with the Florida Commission on Ethics. Third is that we could just close it, say we're done. We're not doing anything further. Or you could modify that and say we're closing it because Dr. Jackson's already filed a complaint. We know it's before the Florida Commission on Ethics, and so, you know, us filing another complaint, it's going to be the same investigation from their perspective. And the fifth is that we could write a letter to the I would think it would be to the city commission, because it would probably be a lead-in to our recommendations for ordinance changes for next year about appearances and, going above and beyond, at least for leadership positions. I'm not sure exactly what the letter would look like and whether you would delegate that to staff and the chair, or whether we'd come back with a draft at the next meeting to approve. But it seems to me that those are kind of the five. I can't see any other place that we land other than in one of those five buckets. So, still, I'll take any motion from anybody on the board.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Grant, you're recognized.
I move.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Dr. Grant. I keep doing that. Dr. Grant.
Okay. I move that we have the chair write a letter. I would propose to the individual, you could CC City Commission, but I think the intent of the letter is to notify the individual of what we have looked at and our consensus, essentially, that we think there was, the perception of impropriety in this particular case, whether intended or not. We have to work on the wording of that, but I think, that's the motion, is to compose a letter at this point. So that's what I move.
Okay, I have a motion.
Second.
I'm going to say Mr. Davis's nose came under the wire on that one, although I think we had about 3 seconds down here. Motion and a second. Is there any discussion of the motion? Questions about the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Nay. And that is the motion. Now, just for my purposes, is this a letter you guys want sent before the next meeting, or do you want to see the draft at the next meeting? I don't know that we're under any particular time constraints here, other than my desire to be done with this. I would take the consensus of the board members.
See a draft? Yeah, we can see a draft at the next meeting.
See a draft at the next meeting? Is that all right with everyone? We'll do it that way. And we might, I'll tell you what, I'll write something that's fairly strong, so that if you guys want to tone it down, you can tone it down, and it's easier to tone down than it is to tone up, in my view, to do it at least in a public meeting. Okay, we will be back one last time with a letter that at the next meeting, that's getting signed at the next meeting, Ms. Meadows-Keefe. Is there any board member who has any item that they want added to future agendas, to a future agenda? And again, you can always tell Ms. Meadows-Keefe you want something on the agenda. I don't want to be the agenda dictator, and I certainly want to put on anything that's of any interest to anyone. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, can I go back for a second? Alibi.
Mr. Grant.
In terms of future agendas, we had talked a number of meetings ago about the Sheriff's Office conducting an investigation as to one of the complaints that we received a while ago on the mayor. Has that been concluded? Has that been completed? Remember the Sheriff's Office said he was going to investigate?
Are you talking about the purchase of software?
Correct.
Yeah, they did.
Completed? It's done?
Complete that, and there were no charges filed. I'm seeing a nod from the city attorney representative in the back, so there were no charges filed on that.
Okay, so how about at the next meeting, we will have a more fulsome report on that particular issue, and I'll be prepared to answer any questions that you may have. And if there's anything specific, just get with Ms. Meadows-Keefe, and she will share it with the full board, but if there's anything specific you have in mind, let her know, and we'll make sure those questions get answered. So our next meeting is Tuesday, November 21st, 4 to 7 here in the City Commission chamber. And with that, if there are no comments for the good of the order, Mr. Currington?
I'd hoped to do this over the recess, but I have just noted, maybe belatedly, we have maybe an improper cite in our Article 9.
But that's a technical check correction?
it would be a change of citation.
Okay, I think with the concurrence of the board, I'm seeing all nods, so I'm going to take that as unanimous. I gave Ms. Meadows Keefe 2 Oxford commas that I wanted to see in there, so we will do that. Mr. Jackson, you're recognized. Dr. Jackson.
Can I say one thing quick? We had a situation in the county. One of the commissioners was able to purchase a house. You've probably been reading about it. What offended me on that was it's when a county commissioner or a city manager does business with someone that they're doing business with publicly. Now, my thinking was anyone who's going to, if you want to use the house situation, if she wants to buy the house, I don't care what it pays for. I don't care how much she paid for it. I don't care how much she's paid in remodeling it. The question is, did she pay the same price that was offered to the public? And the answer to that is no. The lowest price ever offered to the public was $199,000. She was offered a price of $188,500, and J.T. Burnett kicked in a $10,000, $12,000 roof. Okay, when an elected official gets a spatial benefit, and definitely spatial benefit to me is a spatial benefit that I don't get as a public citizen, that's a problem. So when you're writing this letter, not only the letter, but I think if you're going to be changing the ethics ordinance, we ought to have something in there to tell city commissioners, not that you should have to, but obviously we have to, that you will not do business with contractors or individuals doing business with you. And if it's not a good practice to do that, and if you go ahead and do it, you must make sure that you're paying the same price that's offered to the public. And I think that's pretty clear, and thank you for having an opportunity to mention that.
Yes, sir. Anyone else? Anything for the good? Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I'm slow on the go here, but could we go back to items that might be considered in future agendas? Could I make one comment?
Surely.
And
Please do.
I know I've mentioned this before, but I still believe it would be helpful if we as a board submitted a letter to the newspaper, positive, constructive, but would outline what we're trying to do and why we're trying to accomplish some of the steps we're trying to accomplish. I know when most of us give to organizations, I appreciate an organization coming back and saying, you're the folks supporting us, and here's what we're doing with your monies. The taxpayers are paying for this board to operate, and I think it would be a positive thing, an educational thing. For example, the one-page summary in our packet today that has the reports and recommendations we've made and the city's response, all of that to me is constructive and positive. It shows some progress and good things being done, and I think it would be appreciated by the public. And one of the things that continues to pop in my mind that influences me when I think about the recommendation we've made on misuse of office and adding an ethics code provision for that, and I think Julie found this, maybe you did, Mr. Chairman, when you go to the State Ethics Commission website and you look at the categories of offenses where ethics charges have been brought, one of the greatest categories, 60-something%, is for misuse of office statewide. That is the most common category for ethics violations in the state. And when we come to the City of Tallahassee Ethics Code, we don't even have a provision that would allow this board to move forward when the public has said this board needs to exist for those purposes. Now, that's not blaming anybody. It's not attacking anybody. It's just saying educationally wise, there's a need for this. It's practical. It's common sense. It's decent. It's law-abiding. It's fundamental. It's good for the public. But that educational matter of us choosing our own words respectfully, thoughtfully, constructively to give information out to the public. And again, in no way would I hope that be done, if it were done, to attack or blame, but simply to say this is why we're recommending what we're recommending and why we're trying to do what we're trying to do.
Okay, we will have a draft, and I'm sure that Julie and Jerry can both comment on or add to your comments, and I'm going to suggest to Julie that she may want to run it between now and the next meeting past you, because you just said some strings of words that would have been very politic appearing in the local paper. Anyone else? With that, we are adjourned, and we're taking our break.
Big break.
No, I want you and Jerry to write it, and I want you to make it meaner than you would normally write it.